I'm sorry, ma'am. There seems to be an issue with this ticket. Would you mind stepping aside for just a moment? The words were soft, polished, delivered with a smile that had been practiced in enough mirrors to look genuine from a distance. Dr. Naomi Reeves stopped walking. She looked at the gate agent. A blonde woman in her early 40s uniform pressed to a crisp line red nails resting lightly on the keyboard, a name badge that read Victoria Hale, and felt the specific quiet weight of a sentence she had heard before. Not those exact words, but that sentence, the one underneath the words. You don't belong here. Naomi looked down at her phone. Boarding pass pulled up and ready. Zone 1, Seat 3A, Atlantic Crown Airways, Flight 1142 departing Chicago, O'Hare for New York. JFK, departure in 41 minutes. The issue being, Naomi asked. Victoria's fingers moved across the keyboard without hurry. The system has flagged your payment as incomplete. It does happen with corporate cards sometimes. Nothing to be alarmed about. She looked up briefly, and the smile didn't waver. If you'll just step over here, we'll get it sorted. She gestured to a narrow strip of carpet beside the podium, a waiting area designed to make people feel smaller. Naomi did not step toward it. My ticket is confirmed, she said. I received the confirmation at 6 this morning. Fully processed on the company corporate card. I understand that's what your phone shows. Victoria said, her tone carefully patient, the kind of patience that communicates I am managing you. But our terminal is showing a flag, and until that's cleared, I can't put you through to the jet bridge. Then clear it. That's what I'm working on. How long does that take? Victoria tilted her head slightly. These things take the time they take. Behind Naomi, the boarding line was moving. Zone 1 passengers were flowing past her, scanning their passes, stepping through. The sound of the gate scanner beeped steadily, a green light for every person who wasn't her. Naomi Reeves had been in enough courtrooms to know when a question wasn't being answered. She stood still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step to the side. She waited. And she watched. The terminal at O'Hare had the particular exhausted hum of a place that never fully slept. It smelled like chain coffee and recirculated air, and the light had the flat gray quality of somewhere that existed only to move people from one place to another, never intending for anyone to actually feel anything while they were there. Naomi Reeves did not mind airports. She had spent enough time in them that they had stopped feeling foreign. What she minded was being late. She was 44 years old. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Baltimore, the daughter of a woman who taught 3rd grade and believed with a conviction that bordered on holy that the way out was through. Through school, through work, through the kind of discipline that didn't announce itself because it didn't have to. Her mother had told her once when Naomi was 12 and furious about something small. The people who make the most noise are usually the ones who know they're losing. The ones who are winning don't need to. Naomi had carried that sentence into every room she had ever walked into since. She had graduated top of her class at Yale Law, turned down 4 offers from white shoe firms in New York, and instead taken a position at a mid-size aviation law firm in Chicago because she believed aviation law was where the real complexity lived. She had been right. She had spent the next decade becoming one of the most formidable contract litigators in the industry, a woman known not for volume but for precision, the kind of lawyer who asked 2 questions in a cross-examination where other attorneys asked 12 and still walked away with more. At 39, she had been recruited directly by Philip Garrett, CEO of Atlantic Crown Airways, who had watched her dismantle an opposing counsel's expert witness in a deposition, and reportedly said to his deputy, "That woman is the most dangerous person in any room she walks into. I want her on my side." She had been general counsel of Atlantic Crown for 5 years now. She was the youngest in the company's history. She wore that fact quietly the way she wore everything. Today she had been at the office since 5 in the morning. She had spent 3 hours on a video call with the legal team walking through arguments, stress testing positions, and reassuring a very nervous CEO that the case they were about to argue was winnable. Because it was. She knew it in the cellular bone-deep way that only comes from having read every page of a contract twice, then reading it again looking for what the other side thinks they found. The case was Hargrove Global Arbitration. Hargrove Global was a private investment fund, the kind that didn't build anything, only acquired, and they had spent the past 8 months arguing that Atlantic Crown had breached a 2022 merger covenant by misrepresenting operational capacity during a fuel pricing crisis. Their position was that the crisis had been a foreseeable event, that Atlantic Crown had known about it and failed to disclose it properly, and that this gave Hargrove the legal standing to trigger a hostile acquisition clause buried in the original merger documents. If they won, Atlantic Crown Airways, 80 years old with routes on 4 continents, would be dismantled and sold in pieces before spring. 40,000 jobs. Pilots, flight attendants, baggage handlers, gate agents, mechanics, schedulers. Gone. Philip Garrett had said to her at the end of their call this morning, "Naomi, you are the only person alive who can walk into that room in New York and make this go away. Get on that plane. Get on that." She had told him she would. She had meant it. Now she was standing at gate K-22, watching the boarding line thin around her with a gate agent who was moving her fingers across a keyboard and not actually doing anything Naomi could see, and the clock on the terminal wall showing 38 minutes to departure. She looked at Victoria Hale. Victoria was a woman who wore her appearance like a second uniform. Everything about her was deliberate, the way her hair was pulled back with just enough elegance to suggest it had taken time, the way her posture suggested she was someone accustomed to being the authority in a small space, the way the smile never fully left her face, even when it wasn't warm. She was the kind of beautiful that had learned early to use itself as a distraction. She glanced at Naomi between keystrokes, the way a person glances at something they've already decided doesn't require their full attention. Naomi recognized the look, had been receiving versions of it since she was 22, and wore blazers to job interviews where the interviewer still seemed surprised she was the candidate. "Ma'am," she said, keeping her voice even, "my zone is boarding." "I can see that," Victoria said pleasantly. "Then can you tell me what specific flag we're dealing with? I can have our corporate travel desk on the phone in 30 seconds. Victoria's fingers paused for a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. Then they resumed. "That won't be necessary. Our system handles verification internally. I'd prefer to resolve it now rather than wait." "I understand." Victoria looked up. The smile remained. "And I'd prefer to resolve it correctly rather than quickly. Why don't you have a seat and I'll call you when we're ready?" She gestured again to the strip of carpet beside the podium. Naomi looked at it, then back at Victoria. "I'll stand here," she said. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. "Not much." A slight tightening around the eyes, the way a person looks when they expected compliance and didn't get it. She had clearly operated in this small carpeted kingdom long enough to expect that the gesture toward the waiting area would be followed. Naomi had not followed it. "Of course," Victoria said after a beat. "That's fine." It was not fine, and they both knew it. 5 minutes passed. Zone 1 boarding ended. The gate agent's voice came over the intercom, cheerful, scripted, inviting Zone 2 passengers to approach. Naomi watched them go. Families, business travelers, a woman with a sleeping toddler balanced on one hip. The scanner beeped green for every single one of them. She stepped up to the podium. "The flag," she said. "Has it been resolved?" Victoria did not look up immediately. She finished whatever she was typing or appeared to be typing, and then raised her eyes with the expression of a woman who had not forgotten Naomi was there but had hoped she might feel otherwise. Still processing. It's been 5 minutes. Verification doesn't operate on a preference timeline. What is the verification process? Walk me through the steps. Victoria paused. For a person so carefully composed, the pause was revealing. It's an internal system. I don't think the technical details would be useful to you. I'm a lawyer, Naomi said. Technical details are the only thing I find useful. Walk me through it. A flicker. Just one. Behind the professional calm of Victoria Hale's expression, something moved annoyance, recalculation, the slight recalibration of someone who has encountered an obstacle they didn't account for. She recovered it quickly, but Naomi had seen it. Our system flags high-value international tickets purchased on corporate cards within a short booking window as a precautionary measure, Victoria said. The flag requires a supervisor override. Then please call your supervisor. My supervisor is currently dealing with a situation at gate K18. How long until they're available I couldn't say. Could you radio them? I already have. And they'll be here when they're here. Zone 2 boarding ended. Zone 3 was called. Naomi felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. Not panic, not tears, but the particular controlled fury of someone who has done everything right and is being told it isn't enough. She had felt it before. She had learned over a lifetime of being the only person who looked like her in rooms full of people who did not, to hold it where it couldn't be used against her. She pulled out her phone, dialed the Atlantic Crown corporate travel desk from memory. It rang twice. Atlantic Crown Corporate Travel. This is James. James? This is Dr. Naomi Reeves, General Counsel. I need a verbal confirmation on ticket number A-C-A-7741, departing O'Hare, Gate K22 for JFK. One moment, Dr. Reeves. A brief pause. Keyboard sounds. Yes, ma'am. Ticket. A-C-A-7741. Confirmed and fully processed. Seat 3. A Zone 1. Corporate card authorization cleared at 6:02 this morning. Is there an issue? There's a flag on the gate terminal. I need that confirmed resolved on your end. I can see the ticket is fully active in our system. There are no flags on our side. Naomi put the phone face up on the podium's edge. Speaker on. Victoria. This is the Atlantic Crown Corporate Travel Desk, confirming the ticket is fully processed with no flags on the airline's internal system. Victoria looked at the phone, then at Naomi. The smile had thinned somewhat. I'm unable to accept verbal third-party confirmation for security purposes, she said. Naomi looked at her. He's not a third party. He is an Atlantic Crown employee confirming an Atlantic Crown ticket at an Atlantic Crown gate. Protocol requires... What protocol? Give me the protocol number. Another pause. Longer this time. Victoria's composure was still intact, but it was working harder now. Ms. Hale James said from the phone, his voice carefully neutral. I can transfer you directly to the O'Hare operations desk if that would help verify. Thank you, James, Naomi said. I'll handle it from here. She ended the call. Zone 3, boarding began to move past her. She watched the clock. 31 minutes to departure. I would like to speak with your supervisor, she said. Right now. Not when they're available. Now. As I said there, I heard what you said. I'm asking you to reach them immediately. This is not a request I'm making for my own comfort. I have a flight to catch and time-sensitive professional obligations on the other end of it. You have 30 seconds before I call the station manager directly. Something crossed Victoria's face that wasn't quite composure anymore. It was the expression of a person deciding how much further to push. She made her decision. She turned to her terminal. And Naomi watched carefully the way she watched witnesses on the stand, as Victoria's hand moved to the side of the screen and with a precise, deliberate motion switched the terminal off. The screen went dark. "I've refreshed the system," Victoria said. The silence that followed had a particular texture. "You turned it off," Naomi said. "I refreshed it." "I watched your hand. You pressed the power switch. I reset the terminal. It's a standard stop." Naomi's voice didn't rise. It simply became very clear the way a knife is clear when it catches light. "You turned off your terminal after receiving verbal confirmation that my ticket is valid. I watched you do it. And now you're going to tell me that you need to wait for a screen that you just turned off to come back on, which means I will miss my boarding window." Victoria said nothing. "I want your employee ID number," Naomi said. "And I want your supervisor at this gate in the next 2 minutes." Victoria's jaw tightened. The beautiful, practiced smile was gone now. In its place was something colder. "Ma'am," she said, "if you continue to be aggressive, I'm going to have to call security." "I am not being aggressive. I am speaking to you in a normal tone of voice and asking for information that is my right to have. I've asked you multiple times to step aside, and I've declined, politely. Each time." Naomi held her gaze. "I am a confirmed ticketed passenger on this flight, and I am standing in the boarding area. You have not given me a single legally valid reason to move." Victoria Hale reached for her radio. "Security to gate K22, she said, her voice crisp and unhurried. "Passenger assistance needed." She did not look at Naomi when she said it. But across the boarding area, a young man in a baseball cap lowered his phone slightly, looked at what he'd been watching for the last 10 minutes, and quietly pressed record. His name was Marcus Webb, 26 years old, third-year law student at Northwestern, flying home to New York to visit his mother before finals started eating what was left of his life. He had a window seat in Zone 3, a backpack full of case law summaries and the particular observational instinct that law school develops in people who were already paying attention before they enrolled. He had been watching for 7 minutes. He had watched the way Victoria Hale smiled while saying things that weren't kind. He had watched the deliberate unhurry of her movements, the way she used small procedural delays like a wall. He had watched Naomi Reeves stand still and speak clearly and ask reasonable questions and receive obstruction wrapped in politeness in return. He had watched Victoria turn off that terminal. He had started recording 4 minutes ago, holding his phone at his side, then slowly, steadily raising it as the conversation sharpened. He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't being covert. When Naomi glanced toward the crowd during one of the pauses, she and Marcus made brief eye contact. He held the phone up slightly. She looked at it, then looked away. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But she had seen him. She knew. 12 feet to Marcus's left, Diane Ortega had stopped walking when the conversation started getting loud enough to hear clearly. She was 50 years old, wore a gray blazer over a dark dress, and carried herself with the quiet no-nonsense of someone who had spent years standing in airports and had learned to read their rhythms. She had been a flight attendant for 15 years before moving into airline operations management. She had left that career 4 years ago when her mother got sick and she moved back to Chicago to help. She knew exactly what a ticket flag verification looked like. She knew it took 60 seconds. 1 phone call, 1 confirmation number. Done. She had watched Victoria Hale spend 20 minutes not making that call. "That flag is a routine system error," she said to the man standing next to her quietly. "The agent is supposed to call a verification line. It takes less than a minute. She hasn't touched that phone once." The man frowned. "Why would she?" "Because she doesn't want to," Diane said. Her voice was flat with a kind of tired certainty. She stepped out of the line. The crowd around gate K22 had become something different in the last few minutes. The loose shuffle of passengers waiting to board had reorganized itself into the watchful semicircle of people who sense that something is about to happen and aren't sure yet whether they want to be closer or farther away. Several phones were up. A few people had lowered their carry-ons to the floor, the unconscious signal that they were settling in. When Victoria called for security, a murmur moved through the group. Not shock. Something more like a slow exhale, the sound people make when a thing they feared would happen happens anyway. Naomi heard it. She did not react to it. She was doing the thing she did in courtrooms when opposing counsel was trying to fluster her. She slowed down inside. She had trained herself over years to let her external stillness create a kind of internal quiet, a space where she could think clearly while everything around her was designed to make her stop thinking. She looked at the terminal clock. 28 minutes to departure. She looked at the boarding gate. Zone 3 was almost through. Zone 4 had begun. She pulled out her phone and opened her contacts. She had Philip Garrett's personal cell. She had the O'Hare station manager's number from the last time she'd had to call it 2 years ago over a cargo dispute that never made it to litigation, because she'd resolved it in a 20-minute phone call. She looked at both numbers. She decided to wait 1 more minute. "Excuse me." Diane Ortega was beside her now, speaking directly to Naomi, her voice low and clear. "I'm a former airline employee. I just want you to know I've been watching this since the beginning. That flag should have been cleared 10 minutes ago. 1 phone call. That's all it takes." Naomi looked at her. "I know," she said quietly. "Is there anything I can do?" "Keep watching." A pause. "And keep standing here." Diane nodded. She did not move. Marcus Webb had edged closer as well. He said nothing yet. But he was recording, and he had the composed, alert expression of someone who had studied evidence law and understood exactly what he was doing. Victoria, returning from her radio call, looked at the small cluster forming around Naomi and recalibrated. Her expression did something complicated. The smile was fully gone, now replaced by a controlled, professional stiffness, the face of someone reverting to official mode. "Ma'am," she said, "I've called for assistance. If you'll just, while we wait," Naomi said, "I want you to know that I placed a call to the Atlantic Crown corporate travel desk 4 minutes ago." The call was on speakerphone. The confirmation of my ticket was heard by multiple passengers in this area. She looked at Victoria steadily. "I want that noted. I can note whatever you'd like," Victoria said. "I'd also like to note that you deactivated your terminal immediately after receiving that confirmation." Victoria's expression did not change, but something in her posture did the faintest stiffening at the base of the neck, the kind of physical tell that cross-examination training teaches you to watch for. "And I'd like to note," Naomi continued, her voice the same precise, unraised tone it had been for the past 20 minutes, "that this interaction has been recorded by at least 1 passenger in this area." She did not look at Marcus when she said it. She didn't need to. Victoria looked at Marcus. He met her gaze over his phone screen, steady as a wall. At the edge of the concourse, 2 figures in blue uniforms were making their way toward Gate K-22. One of them was young, moving with the slightly uncertain energy of someone new to a role. The other was older, wider, moving with the settled proprietary deliberateness of a man who had walked these terminals for 20 years and considered them his. His badge read, Croft D. Chicago Airport Police. Naomi saw him coming and felt the temperature in her chest drop by several degrees. She had dealt with Crofts before. Not this specific man, but this specific type, the kind of authority that had calcified over time into something that couldn't distinguish between its power and its judgment, because it had never had to. She straightened, folded her hands in front of her, made herself small in exactly the ways that did not involve moving, or being quiet, or pretending she was somewhere other than where she was. The officer approached the podium. "What's the situation, Victoria?" he asked. The familiarity in the question landed first. Not ma'am, not agent, not even Miss Hale. Just Victoria. The first name easy and comfortable, the way people say the name of someone they've worked something out with before. Naomi filed that away. Victoria didn't hesitate. "This passenger is attempting to board with an unverified ticket and has been aggressive with my staff." "Aggressive," Naomi said. "Not a challenge. A correction. Her voice was the same temperature it had been for the last 25 minutes. I have not raised my voice. I have not made a threat. I have not touched anyone or anything. I have asked 3 times for a supervisor-provided verbal confirmation from the airline's own travel desk and requested that the specific protocol being applied to my ticket be explained to me. Croft looked at her. It was not a look that arrived at her. It was a look that moved across her the way certain people look at something they've already categorized before their eyes complete the scan. He took in the blazer, the natural hair pulled back, the dark trousers, the phone in her hand, and she watched him not see any of it because he had already finished deciding what he was looking at. He had seen a black woman being difficult at a gate. That was the story that had already written itself in his head, and everything he observed was being sorted into it. "Ma'am, he said the gate agent has the authority to make boarding decisions. You need to step back." "Officer, this is a civil dispute between myself and the airline. I am a confirmed ticketed passenger. I have not committed any offense. You have no lawful basis to involve yourself in a boarding verification matter." Croft stopped walking. The young officer beside him, early 30s name tag reading R. Espinoza, had stopped as well. Espinoza was looking at the scene with the careful expression of someone trying to read the room before choosing a side. "I'll determine what requires my involvement," Croft said. His voice had taken on a slight edge, specifically at the end of her sentence, specifically at the phrase "no lawful basis." "That's your prerogative," Naomi said. "But the Fourth Amendment sets the parameters of that determination, not individual preference." His face changed. It was subtle, a tightening around the jaw, a small flattening of the brow. But Naomi had spent 19 years reading expressions across tables, and she read this one clearly. He hated the law being quoted at him by someone he had already decided wasn't the kind of person who quoted law. "Step away from the podium," he said. "I am standing in the boarding area of my flight. I have not stepped into a restricted space, and I have not been given a lawful order to move. I'm giving you one now. On what basis?" He stepped forward, not toward the podium, toward her. He entered her personal space with deliberate slowness, a technique she recognized designed to communicate that the space between them belonged to him now. She did not step back. From the edge of the crowd, Diane Ortega's voice. "Officer, I've been watching this for 25 minutes. That woman has done nothing wrong. Nothing." Croft didn't look at her. "Ma'am, stay out of this." "I'm a former airline employee," Diane said louder now. "That ticket verification takes 60 seconds. 1 phone call. The agent didn't make it. I said stay out of it, and I said she hasn't done anything wrong." Marcus Webb stepped forward 2 steps. His phone was fully raised now, screen facing Croft, the red recording indicator visible. He said nothing. He simply made sure that Croft knew the camera was there. Croft looked at Marcus, then back at Naomi. "Last warning," he said. "Step back from the podium or you're going to have a problem." "Officer Croft." Naomi said she had clocked his name badge from the moment he arrived. "I am Dr. Naomi Reeves. I am a licensed attorney. I am requesting that you tell me the specific legal basis on which you are ordering me to move so that I can evaluate whether I am legally obligated to comply." Something happened in his expression that she had seen before in different rooms, different circumstances. The specific frustration of a person who is accustomed to authority being accepted on presentation, confronting someone who is asking for the paperwork. He didn't have the paperwork. "You're creating a public disturbance," he said. "I am speaking in a normal tone of voice in a public space. That is not a public disturbance under Illinois statute. You're interfering with airport operations. I am standing in a boarding area. The interference with operations is the failure to process my ticket, not my presence." Officer Espinoza touched Croft's arm lightly. "Dale, maybe we get her information and get a supervisor involved. Let's de-escalate." Croft shook him off. "I am de-escalating?" He was not. He raised his radio. Dispatch. I've got a passenger situation at K22, non-compliant female, possible 1016. The crowd heard that. The murmur that moved through them was not subtle. Espinosa, a man in the crowd, said not loudly, but clearly, she's been standing there for half an hour and she hasn't done anything. I've been watching, same a woman added. She asked for a supervisor. That's it. Marcus Webb, still recording 15 people in this crowd, have been watching this since the beginning. It's all on video. Croft turned toward Marcus. Put that down. I have a legal right to record in a public space, Marcus said. His voice was calm in the way that law school makes you calm, not the calm of someone who isn't afraid, but the calm of someone who has memorized exactly what their rights are and knows that knowing them is its own protection. Illinois Recording Act 720, ILCS 5/14-2. Public space, no expectation of privacy. I'm staying right here. Croft's face was now the color of something slightly past pink. He looked back at Naomi. She was watching him with the focused, patient attention of someone who is simultaneously participating in a conversation and collecting evidence for later. Dr. Reeves Espinosa said, stepping slightly in front of Croft, his voice careful and even. Can you show me your boarding pass and your ID? Let me see if I can help clear this up. Naomi looked at him. In 35 seconds of observation, she had formed a view of Officer Espinosa, young, uncomfortable, trying to find a way to make this stop before it became the thing it was on its way to becoming. She held out her phone with the boarding pass. She took out her ID. Espinosa looked at them. He looked at the boarding pass carefully. He looked at the confirmation code. He looked at her ID. He looked at Croft. Dale, he said quietly, the ticket looks... Step back, Espinosa, Croft said. Espinosa went quiet. Naomi looked at Croft. She said nothing. She waited. 24 minutes to departure. You're going to step back, Croft said, or I'm going to help you do it. You will not touch me, Naomi said. She said it the way you say a fact. Not a plea, not a warning in the theatrical sense, a statement of law, of boundary, of documented reality. You will not touch me in the same tone you might say the sky is blue, or the contract says otherwise. It didn't help. She saw it in his face before his arm moved the decision a fraction of a second in the eyes, the moment when a person with a certain kind of power decides that being defied is itself the provocation. He reached forward and closed his hand around her left arm. The grip was hard. Not investigative, not guiding, hard, the kind that communicates. I have decided this is over. Naomi did not fight it. She did not swing, did not pull, did not make any movement that could be filed under any category he could use against her. She went rigid not from fear, though a cold spike of it hit her chest, but from the specific deliberate choice to give him nothing. No movement, no sound that could be called resistance. Let go of me, she said, her voice steady. You are assaulting me. This is being recorded. She's resisting, Croft said, though she wasn't. He said it to the air, to the crowd, to the invisible future record he was already constructing. She's not resisting, Marcus. Webb said louder now, his voice cracking slightly with the effort of staying controlled. She hasn't moved. Look at the video. She hasn't moved. Diane Ortega stepped forward. Stop. Stop right now. She is standing still. Croft's other hand came up. He grabbed Naomi's arm with both hands now and pulled, and the force of it was more than she had braced for. Her roller bag tipped her shoulder, lurched, and then she was being moved sideways, not voluntarily, not gently. Her bag hit the floor. The zipper had been slightly open. The impact popped it fully. Her laptop slid out onto the terminal floor, the screen flickering once before going dark. and behind it, propelled by the momentum of the bag's fall, a thick bound document slid across the smooth floor of the boarding area and came to rest face up under the lights. The cover page was red. The letters on it were bold and large enough to read from 6 feet away. Atlantic Crown Airways Office of General Counsel, in Ree Hargrove. Global Arbitration Opening Statement, confidential and privileged. Nobody moved toward it immediately. For 2 seconds, it just lay there on the floor, under the flat terminal lights, while Croft continued maneuvering Naomi toward the wall of the jet bridge entrance. Then Sophia Reyes came through the door. The senior flight purser for ACA, Flight 1142, had been on the jet bridge conducting a pre-boarding check when she heard the raised voices. She had opened the door to see what was happening, expecting a standard boarding dispute, an oversized bag, a seat argument, someone who had missed their zone. She had not expected this. She stood in the doorway, taking it in. The officer, the woman, the crowd, the phones, the scattered bag, the documents on the floor. Her gaze moved across the scene with the practiced speed of someone who has handled 17 years of high-pressure cabin situations and learned to read a room in under 4 seconds. Her eyes fell on the document. She read the cover page. She read it again. Her hand came up to her chest. She stepped forward, picked up the document carefully, and held it. Her face had gone through 3 different expressions in the space of a few seconds, the last one settling into something pale and still. Meanwhile, Croft had gotten Naomi to the wall of the jet bridge entrance. Not a full slam, but her shoulder made contact and her other hand went out instinctively and her palm scraped the textured surface of the wall, and the world moved sideways for a moment in the sharp, unwilling way that bodies move when other bodies force them. "Stop resisting," Croft said. "I am not resisting," she said, and her voice was still the same voice, still controlled, still clear, though the effort of keeping it that way under these circumstances was enormous, a thing happening inside her that she refused to let outside. "I am Dr. Naomi Reeves. I am an attorney. You are committing assault and false imprisonment. Every second of this is on video." Marcus Webb was at the front of the crowd now. Phone raised, his face white with something between outrage and the specific horror of a young man who has studied the law and is watching it be violated in real time in front of him and cannot stop it. "She didn't do anything," he said, his voice carrying. "She asked for a supervisor. That is all she did. This entire crowd has seen it." "Back up," Croft said without looking at him. "I have a right to stand here," Marcus said, "and you don't have the right to do what you're doing." Espinoza was on his radio. He had turned away from the scene and was speaking quickly, his back to the crowd, his voice too low to hear. Whatever he was saying it urgently. Diane Ortega had her own phone out. "I need the O'Hare station manager at gate K22 right now," she said into it loudly and clearly. "There is a police use of force in progress. A passenger is being physically detained without probable cause. I need a manager at this gate immediately." The crowd around the gate had swelled. People who had been walking through the concourse had stopped. The half-circle of spectators had become a crowd of 40-50 people, and the phones were up like a forest. Every one of them recording the collective red glow of recording indicators visible even from inside the jet bridge, visible even from the doorway where Sophia Reyes stood holding the document watching. Victoria Hale stood at her podium with her hand over her mouth. This was not what she had wanted. She had wanted the woman to step aside. She had wanted the problem to dissolve to become someone else's issue to walk away down the terminal and not be at her gate anymore. She had called security to make that happen the way she had called security a handful of times before when something made her uncomfortable at this gate and it had worked and the person had gone and that had been the end of it. This was not the end of it. She was watching it become the beginning of something, and she had enough self-awareness in this moment to understand, with a cold, sliding sensation in her stomach, that she was the one who had started it. At the doorway of the jet bridge, Sophia Reyes turned back inside and walked 3 steps to where she could see the cockpit door. "Captain Walsh," she said, and her voice had the quality of someone delivering news. "They need the other person to hear clearly. You need to come out here right now." Captain Raymond Walsh had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years. He had flown through 2 mechanical emergencies, one bird strike a passenger who had needed CPR somewhere over the mid-Atlantic, 4 bomb scares that turned out to be nothing, and one that turned out to be a forgotten laptop battery. He had delivered 2 announcements informing passengers that their flight was being diverted, one of which had resulted in immediate and substantial collective panic that he had managed by staying so calm on the intercom that the cabin had calmed around him like water settling. He was not a man who unraveled. He walked out of the jet bridge and into the terminal and took in the scene with the measuring, unimpressed eyes of someone who has seen worse and knows that the way you read a situation in the first 3 seconds determines everything that happens after. He saw the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw Officer Croft with his hands on a woman and the woman with her shoulder against the wall of his jet bridge and her face angled away from the impact and a red mark already forming along her cheekbone. He saw the young officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He saw a woman in a blazer at the edge of the crowd holding her phone, with the focused expression of someone conducting official business. He saw a young man with a phone raised recording. He saw Sophia behind him holding a document. "Officer," he said. His voice was the voice of a man accustomed to being the final authority in enclosed spaces. "What is this?" Croft looked up. He had the expression of someone interrupted in the middle of something he had convinced himself was necessary. "Captain, this is a police matter. A disorderly passenger. We're handling it." "You're handling it," Walsh repeated. His eyes had already moved to Naomi. He looked at the mark on her face. He looked at her hands open, fingers spread, the deliberate body language of someone making sure there was no ambiguity about whether they were fighting back. "On the wall of my jet bridge." She resisted Sophia. Walsh said her name without looking away from the scene. Sophia Reyes stepped forward and held out the document. Walsh took it, looked at the cover page. He read it the way a man reads something he needs to be absolutely certain about before he speaks. He looked at Naomi Reeves. She was looking back at him. Her shoulder was braced against the wall, Croft's grip still on her arm, and her face had the controlled, precise expression of someone who has decided that whatever happens in the next 30 seconds will be noted and remembered and will matter later. Their eyes met. Walsh said very quietly, "Officer Croft, take your hands off that woman. Right now." Croft's head turned slightly. "Captain, I have authority in this. I said now." There was something in Captain Raymond Walsh's voice in that moment that didn't increase in volume and didn't need to. It had the specific gravity of a person who has been the final word in tight spaces for 30 years, and every person in earshot felt it. Croft let go. He stepped back. His face was the face of a man who is only beginning to understand that the context of what he's been doing has just changed. Naomi slowly, deliberately pushed herself off the wall. She stood upright. She turned. She adjusted her blazer with both hands, one careful motion, and she looked at Croft with an expression that was not anger. It was colder than anger and more permanent. The expression of someone who is not going to forget this, not because she can't let it go, but because she shouldn't. "Are you Dr. Naomi Reeves?" Captain Walsh asked. "Yes. General Counsel, Atlantic Crown Airways." "Yes." Walsh looked at the document in his hands, then at the crowd, then at Sophia, then back at Naomi. Something moved across his face that was several things at once: recognition of the severity of what had just happened in front of him, professional mortification, and a kind of quiet fury that had nowhere to go yet. He turned to Croft. His voice dropped further. You just put your hands on the general counsel of this airline." Croft said nothing. "The woman this company sends to federal arbitration. The woman who handles every major legal matter we have." Walsh's voice was controlled, but it had an edge under it that cut. "You had her against the wall of my jet bridge." Espinosa had already turned away again, back on his radio, talking fast, his posture carrying the energy of someone trying to contain something that was spreading fast. The crowd of 50 people was very still and very quiet. Not silent phones were recording. A few people were speaking softly, but the particular stillness of a group of people watching a moment they know is significant. Naomi reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. She found her small notebook and a pen. She opened it to a clean page. "Officer Croft," she said. Her voice was the same voice. It had been the same voice this entire time, full name and badge number. He stared at her. "Full name," she said again, "and badge number. It's Croft," he said. The confidence was gone. Whatever had been filling him up from inside 20 minutes ago had vacated. He looked smaller somehow in the same uniform. Dale Croft. Badge 8819. She wrote it down. Slowly. Then looked up. "Victoria Hale," she said, turning slightly toward the gate podium. Victoria was still standing there, her hand no longer over her mouth, her face having completed the journey from composed to pale to something that might have been shame, though it was hard to say. "Employee ID number." Victoria's voice came out differently than it had for the last 30 minutes, smaller. VH4401. Naomi wrote that down too. Then she closed the notebook. She turned to Captain Walsh. "Captain, thank you." A pause. "I need to make a phone call. I need you to hold this flight." Walsh looked at the mark on her face, at her laptop on the floor, at the crowd still recording. "Dr. Reeves, Naomi, please. Come on board. We'll sort this from inside. I'll be 5 minutes," she said. "Hold the flight, Captain." She pulled out her phone. The screen had a crack running diagonally from the upper left corner. It had hit the floor when her bag fell. She looked at it. Then at the crack. Then at the 37 unread notifications that had accumulated in the last 10 minutes. She ignored all of them. She dialed a number she knew by heart. She pressed speaker. The entire gate area could hear it ring. Philip Garrett's office. Naomi's voice was even, clear, projecting without effort the way a lawyer's voice projects when they need a room to hear them. "This is Dr. Naomi Reeves. Get him now. It's an emergency." A pause. 1 moment. Dr. Reeves. The sound of hold music for exactly 7 seconds. Then Naomi. "Why aren't you in the air? What happened?" She looked at Croft. She looked at Victoria Hale. She looked at the 50 people with their phones. "Philip," she said, "I'm still at O'Hare. I was physically assaulted and illegally detained at Gate K-22 by a Chicago airport police officer acting on a false report made by one of our own gate agents who refused to follow standard ticket verification protocol and then told the officer I was aggressive. I have a bruise on my face and a damaged phone and a laptop that hit the terminal floor." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 4 full seconds. "Tell me their names." She told him. He repeated them. She heard the shift in his voice as he was writing. "Are you injured, bruised, angry, functional? Get on the plane, win this thing, and when you land, I want your full account. This is not going to stand, Naomi." Victoria Hale sat down on a stool behind her podium. Nobody had asked her to sit. She just stopped being able to stand in the same way she had been standing. And Officer Dale Croft, who 20 minutes ago had been the largest force in this small carpeted kingdom, stood in the middle of a crowd of 50 people with their phones up with his badge and his uniform, and the absolute certainty that had carried him into this situation and looked like a man who had only just realized where he was standing. Sophia Reyes appeared at Naomi's elbow, quiet and steady. "Dr. Reeves, let me gather your documents. Let me help you board." Naomi looked at her. "Thank you, Sophia." A pause. "You saw the document and you brought it to the captain immediately. You didn't wait to understand the situation. You just acted." Another pause. "That matters." Sophia's eyes went bright for a second. She nodded and bent to collect the papers from the floor. Marcus Webb lowered his phone for the first time in 20 minutes. "Ma'am," he said. "Are you okay?" "I will be," Naomi said. She looked at him. At the phone, at the evidence he had just collected for the last 22 minutes. "Don't post that yet. It's evidence. Give me your email." He gave it to her. She sent him one of her business cards from the digital wallet on her cracked phone. "Email the file to that address tonight," she said. "Before you do anything else with it, can I count on you?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Absolutely." "Good." She looked at him for another second. "You're going to be a good lawyer." She turned. She picked up her roller bag from the floor, checked that everything was inside, zipped it. She picked up her laptop. The screen was dark, but when she pressed the power button, it flickered on. Still working. She squared her shoulders. She walked on to the jet bridge. Behind her, the crowd at Gate K22 was buzzing with the low-charged energy of people who have just witnessed something that matters. Several were already texting. Marcus Webb was looking at his phone, scrolling through his footage. At 11:47 in the morning, he posted a 90-second clip with the caption, "Airport cop physically detains airline's top lawyer at O'Hare because gate agent refused to clear a 60-second ticket flag." She gave him badge numbers. She gave him statute citations. She never raised her voice once. Watch what happens next. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the clip had 40,000 views. Philip Garrett had not reached the position of CEO of a major international airline by being slow to respond to crises. Before Naomi's plane had cleared Chicago's airspace, he had made 3 phone calls. The first was to the O'Hare station director, a man named Dave Kowalski, who had spent 22 years managing the operational chaos of one of the busiest airports in the world and had never received a call quite like this one. Dave Garrett said without prelude, "Your gate agent at K22, Victoria Hale, just had our general counsel physically assaulted on company property. I need her badge, pulled her employment file on my desk in an hour, and a full account of what happened before her shift ends." Are we clear? Dave Kowalski had heard the call. He had also, in the 4 minutes since it ended, received 6 forwarded videos from 6 different sources, all of them showing the same gate, the same woman in the blazer, and the same officer. "I'm on it," he said. The second call was to the mayor of Chicago's deputy chief of staff, whose number Garrett had saved for exactly the kind of moment where the conversation needed to skip 3 layers of bureaucracy and go directly to the person who could move things. "One of your airport police officers, Dale Croft badge 8819, just physically assaulted the general counsel of Atlantic Crown Airways in a crowded terminal in front of 50 witnesses and a dozen videos," Garrett said. "I have her on a plane to New York right now with a bruise on her face. I will be speaking with the city's aviation authority in the morning. I will also be speaking with the Tribune and the Sun-Times and every aviation news outlet that covers O'Hare if Officer Croft is still in possession of his badge by the end of the day." He hung up. The third call was to Atlantic Crown's head of internal investigation. "Get a team to O'Hare," he said. "I want every camera angle from Gate K22 preserved. I want passenger manifests. I want staff logs. I want Victoria Hale's complete employment history in front of me before midnight." Back at Gate K22. The process of consequences had already begun. Victoria Hale was in the break room when Dave Kowalski found her. She was sitting with a cup of coffee. She hadn't touched her uniform, still on her name badge, catching the light. He pulled the door closed behind him. He put her employment file on the table. He didn't sit down. "Victoria," he said, "talk me through what happened." She talked him through it. Her version, the system flag, the unverified ticket, the passenger who wouldn't cooperate, the escalation that had gotten out of hand. She used words like protocol and security concern and non-compliant, all of which were the vocabulary of someone trying to build a wall of procedure around a decision they had made from somewhere else entirely. Kowalski listened without interrupting. Then he opened the file. "There is a verification call," he said. "One phone call to our internal confirmation line. It takes 60 seconds. Our terminal logs show you did not make it." Victoria said nothing. "I also have 11 passenger complaints in your file, over 3 years." He turned a page. 4 of them describe incidents in which you directed security toward passengers of color who were subsequently found to have valid documentation. He looked at her. "You've received 3 verbal warnings. No further action was taken." Victoria's expression had changed in the way that expressions change when a person stops performing and simply becomes the situation they're in. "I thought," she began. "I know what you thought," Kowalski said quietly. He was not unkind about it, but he was not gentle either. He was simply precise. "You looked at a woman, made a decision about her before she said her first sentence, and when she pushed back, you escalated rather than following procedure. And now I have a video of one of our passengers being put against a wall by a Chicago cop, and that passenger is the person who runs our legal department." He reached across the table. "I need your badge," he said. Victoria looked at it. It had been on her collar for 16 years. "You're terminated, Victoria. For cause. Failure to follow verification protocol. History of selective enforcement." He waited. "I'm not going to pretend this is solely about the protocol. But the protocol is what I can document, and it's more than enough." She unclipped the badge. She placed it in his hand. She did not say anything else. On the other side of the airport, in a small, windowless office in the police substation near Terminal 3, Sergeant Paulina Rivera was having a different but related conversation with Dale Croft. She had watched the video twice before he arrived. She put her phone on the table between them, screen-up video, paused on the clearest frame, Naomi's shoulder against the wall, Croft's hands on her arms, her palms open and visible, her face turned a red mark beginning to form on her cheekbone. "Walk me through it," Rivera said. He walked her through it. His version: the gate agent's call, the non-compliant passenger, the escalation, the standard compliance hold. Rivera let him finish. Then she pointed at the phone. "Her hands are open," she said. "In every frame of this video, from the moment you made contact to the moment the captain arrived, her hands are open and her feet are not moving. That is not resistance, Dale. She was verbally—" "She quoted you a statute," Rivera said. "That's not a disturbance. That's someone knowing their rights." Croft said nothing. "You didn't run her." "ID," Rivera said. Espinoza offered to. "You stopped him. You didn't ask a single verification question. You took the gate agent's characterization and treated it as fact." She paused. "Why?" He didn't answer. Not because he was refusing, but because the honest answer to that question was the kind of answer that couldn't be said out loud in this room or any room, and they both knew it. "Badge and service weapon," Rivera said. "Administrative leave effective immediately pending full investigation. The mayor's office has already been in touch. The city's aviation authority is requesting a full report by morning." Croft unclipped his badge. He put it on the table. He unholstered his weapon and placed it beside it. He looked at them for a moment. "This was a misunderstanding," he said. "No," Rivera said. She was not unkind about it. She was simply exact. A misunderstanding is when you don't have the information. You had the information. Your partner had it. He offered it to you. You chose something else. She looked at him steadily. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." She picked up the badge. At 35,000 feet, Dr. Naomi Reeves had her laptop open, her cracked phone charging on the seat-back port, and a legal brief in front of her. Susan, the senior flight purser who had been briefed by Sophia by radio relay, had brought her ice wrapped in a napkin for her cheekbone and a glass of water without being asked. Naomi had pressed the ice briefly against her face, set it aside, opened her email. Marcus Webb's footage was already there. She had asked him to send it the moment it was taken, and it had arrived 20 minutes before she sat down. She watched it once. She watched herself standing still. She watched her hands open and visible. She watched herself speak in a clear, even voice, through every single moment of it, not once raising it, not once making a gesture that could be described as threatening or aggressive. She watched Croft put his hands on her. Her stomach turned. She saved the file. She opened a new email. She began typing a message to the legal team and a parallel message to Philip Garrett. Preservation orders, evidence requests, file requests. She worked for 3 hours. Outside the window, the Atlantic glittered under a clear sky. 40,000 jobs. She was not going to be late. Before she boarded, before she made the call, before the jet bridge swallowed her away from the terminal and the scene and the 50 people still standing there with their phones, there was a moment. Captain Walsh had begun walking with her toward the jet bridge door, saying something about about getting her settled about anything the cabin crew could do. Sophia had gathered the documents. The crowd was shifting, reforming, some people beginning to move again, others staying put, watching. Naomi stopped. Not because she had forgotten something, not because she was hesitating. She stopped and turned back to face the gate area and specifically to face Dale Croft, who was still standing in the middle of it, and Victoria Hale, who was still behind the podium, and the crowd of 50 people who were still there. She stood in the opening of the jet bridge and she spoke. Not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. "Officer Croft," she said. He looked at her. "I want you to understand something." Her voice was measured and clear and landed without effort. 40 minutes ago you made a decision. You heard her. She did not gesture toward Victoria. Just let the word her do the work, and you made a decision before you asked a single question. You didn't run my ID. You didn't ask your partner's opinion when he offered it. You saw what you'd already decided you were going to see, and you put your hands on me. She paused. That decision is going to follow you for a very long time. Croft said nothing. The red had drained from his face. She looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back. She had the expression of someone who is no longer trying to construct an alternative version of events and is simply sitting in the one that happened. "You turned off that terminal," Naomi said to her, after receiving verbal confirmation. "I watched your hand." She let that sit. 16 years in this industry and you threw all of it away in the time it takes to flip a switch. She paused. Because you didn't want to look at the screen and find out you were wrong. The boarding area was completely quiet. "My name is Dr. Naomi Reeves," she said, addressing the whole space, now not performing, not making a speech, just stating the record. "I am the General Counsel of Atlantic Crown Airways. I have practiced law for 19 years. This morning I was on my way to New York to represent this airline in a federal arbitration that determines whether 40,000 people keep their jobs. That is what you were keeping off this plane." She looked at the crowd, at Marcus Webb, who had lowered his phone, who was watching her with the expression of someone who is going to remember this, at Diane Ortega, who stood at the edge of the group with her arms folded and her eyes steady. "I did not raise my voice today," Naomi said. "I did not make a threat. I did not touch anyone. I stood where I had the right to stand, and I asked the questions I had the right to ask." She let that sit for a moment. That is not aggression. That is what it looks like to know your rights and not be frightened of them. She picked up her roller bag. This was recorded, she said, every second of it, and everything that happens next will be handled through the appropriate legal channels. She looked at Croft one more time. You should call your union rep, right now. She turned and walked onto the jet bridge. The crowd remained still for a moment after she disappeared. Then Diane Ortega said to no one in particular, "Well." She exhaled. "Well." Marcus Webb looked at his phone, then at the footage, then at the business card in his hand, her name and the Atlantic Crown Legal Department address. He pulled up the clip. He wrote the caption. He posted it. By the time the jet bridge door closed and Flight 1142 began to push back from the gate, the clip had 12,000 views. By the time the plane reached its cruising altitude over the Indiana state line, it had 90,000. By the time Naomi Reeves opened her legal brief over the Illinois-Ohio border, it had 500,000. She didn't know that. She had turned off her notifications. She had work to do. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin had heard everything. Not all of it. The terminal doors had muffled most of the details, but enough. Enough to hear raised voices. Enough to catch fragments through the forward door when it had been cracked open. Enough to see Sophia Reyes emerge with documents and disappear again. Enough to hear Captain Walsh's voice, which was not a voice people were accustomed to hearing in terse, commanding tones. When Naomi walked through the cabin door led by Sophia, the hush that fell was the specific hush of people who have been paying attention and are processing what they've seen. A woman in 2A looked up and then quickly looked away. A man in 3B met Naomi's eyes for a moment with an expression that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite making it. A younger man in the aisle seat of row 4 watched her pass with the open, slightly odd expression of someone who has been witness to something and is still deciding what to do with having seen it. Nobody spoke. Nobody clapped. Nobody said anything. It wasn't indifference. It was the kind of silence that means we saw it and we haven't finished thinking about it yet. Dr. Reeves. Sophia said quietly, stopping beside seat 3. Captain Walsh would like to offer you seat 1A, please. It's the least 3. A, Naomi said. Thank you, Sophia. It's a middle seat. I know what it is. Naomi lifted her roller bag into the overhead bin, closed it, and sat down. She buckled her seatbelt. She set her laptop on the tray table. She opened her brief. Sophia stood for a moment. Then I'll bring you water. No ice this time, I imagine. Please. Sophia paused before she moved away. She kept her voice below the level of the cabin. I want to say the way you handled what happened out there. I've been flying for 17 years, and I've watched a lot of situations go wrong. I've never seen anyone handle something that ugly with that much. She searched for the word. I was angry, Naomi said simply. She was looking at her brief, not at Sophia. I was genuinely angry. I just decided it wasn't going to be useful. Sophia said nothing for a second. Then, that's the hardest thing to do. Yes, Naomi agreed. It is. Sophia left to get the water. Naomi stared at the brief in front of her. Hargrove Global Arbitration Opening Statement. She had written the first draft of this document 6 months ago. She had rewritten it 4 times. She knew its argument the way she knew her own heartbeat, present, steady, something she had stopped having to think about and could simply rely on. She pressed her fingertips against the bruise on her cheekbone. It was beginning to set properly now, the dull, deep ache of impact on bone. Her shoulder was stiff where it had met the wall. She had sat with worse pain than this in professional settings. She had argued a 2-day deposition with a stress fracture in her right wrist that she hadn't known was there until afterward. She had made a 40-minute closing argument in federal court 10 days after her mother's funeral because the case didn't stop for grief and she had needed to be there. She was accustomed to carrying things. What she was not accustomed to, what she never got accustomed to, no matter how many times it happened in one form or another, was the specific, exhausting weight of being treated as a problem before you had done a single thing wrong, of entering a space with all the right credentials, all the right documentation, all the patience and legal precision and measured language in the world, and having it mean nothing because someone had looked at you and decided before you spoke. She was not going to cry on this flight, not because she was suppressing something, but because the emotion she was carrying right now was not sadness. It was cold and clean and pointed, and it had a very clear direction. Philip Garrett was going to want her full account. She was going to give it to him, every second precisely reconstructed. She began to type. The passenger in 2B, a man in his 60s who had been watching her since she sat down and had the slightly guilty, slightly searching expression of someone who'd been nearby during the incident in the terminal and hadn't said anything, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said. Naomi looked up. "I was at the gate," he said. He couldn't quite hold her eyes. When it was happening. I didn't say anything. I should have." He paused. "I'm sorry." Naomi looked at him, at the honest discomfort in his face, not the performance of remorse, but the real thing. The thing that sits in your chest when you know you chose the easier path. "Okay," she said, not dismissively, with the simple directness of someone who doesn't have the time or energy to absolve him, but appreciates the honesty of the acknowledgement. He nodded, turned back to his window. The plane pushed back from the gate. Captain Walsh's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to apologize for the delay at the gate. There was an incident that required immediate attention from our team. We have handled it, and we are now underway. I want to personally say to any passenger who witnessed what took place, our airline holds itself to a higher standard than what you saw today. We fell short of it. That matters to us." A beat. "Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Several passengers glanced at each other. A few people nodded. Someone in the back said something quiet that the cabin absorbed without response. Naomi heard all of it. She was already looking at her screen again. Hargrove Global Arbitration. Opening statement. 40,000 jobs. She had 7 hours and 14 minutes. She got to work. She landed at JFK at 9:22 in the morning Eastern Time. A man named Patrick Hale, Atlantic Crown's New York liaison professional and brisk carrying a printed confirmation of the day's schedule, met her at the jet bridge. He stopped when he saw her face. "Dr. Reeves," he said. "Mr. Garrett told me, are you all right? We have I need the car, Patrick. I need to change at the hotel. Arbitration starts at 10 and I need 12 minutes for coffee." He had the car. She had the coffee. In the back of the black sedan cutting through early morning Manhattan traffic, Naomi read the summary her legal team had sent at 7 a.m. The preservation orders filed, the evidence secured, the initial findings on Victoria Hale's employment history. She read it the way she read everything important once completely, then once more for what wasn't said between the lines. She set the phone down. She looked out the window at the city. Philip Garrett was waiting in the hotel lobby, which was not a thing she had expected. He was a man who ran a $22 billion company from a position of deliberate remove, not cold, but accustomed to operating through deputies. She had never seen him pace. He was pacing. "Naomi," he said, crossing to her before she was fully through the door. She held up one hand. "Philip, I'm fine. I need to go upstairs. You have a bruise on your face. I'm aware. I want to call I need 12 minutes. Then I need to go win this." She looked at him steadily. "We'll talk about the rest of it when I land. I promise." He exhaled. "Hale is terminated. Croft is on administrative leave. I have calls scheduled with the city before noon." "Good," she said. "That's all good. More when I'm back." She moved toward the elevator. "Naomi." His voice stopped her. When she turned, he looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has spent years knowing he hired the right person and is being reminded of it in a very specific way. "I know what you're walking into. After what happened this morning. I just want to say, Philip." She said his name gently but with finality. "I have been carrying things to work my entire career. Today is not different. I'll see you tonight." She went upstairs. 12 minutes later, she came down. The woman who walked through the lobby toward the waiting car was not the woman who had walked in. Not because she was different, she was exactly the same woman, but the rumpled blazer was gone. In its place, a dark charcoal suit impeccably cut that moved with her like armor, low heels that struck the marble floor with a quiet authority. Her hair pulled back so tight and smooth it looked deliberate as a statement, and the bruise on her cheekbone visible, undisguised, no makeup placed over it. She had thought about that. She had the concealer. She had decided against it. It was evidence, and she intended to use it. The arbitration complex was in a private legal building on the east side of Midtown wood paneling, recessed lighting the specific hushed formality of a space designed to make significant decisions feel like they have appropriate gravity. The Hargrove Global team was already there when she walked in. Their lead counsel, James Whitfield, late 50s, silver cufflinks. The practiced confidence of a man who had been winning these rooms for 30 years looked up when she entered. His gaze moved to her face, specifically to the bruise. He recovered smoothly. "Dr. Reeves, we were beginning to think you might not make it." "You can stop thinking that," she said and sat down. For the next 6 hours, she was the sharpest thing in the room. She was not performing. She was not running on adrenaline or spite or the desire to prove something to anyone, though all of those things were there present and accounted for, filed in the part of her that kept track. She was simply doing the work she had spent 19 years becoming capable of with the precision that came from having read every page of every relevant document more times than anyone on the opposing side. She dismantled their force majeure argument in 40 minutes. She cited 3 cases they had overlooked in preparing their position, walked the panel through the specific contract language Hargrove's own lawyers had drafted in 2022, and demonstrated clearly, methodically, without theater, that the argument they were making required interpreting a clause in a way that contradicted the documented intent of the parties who wrote it. She cross-examined their expert witness, a financial consultant named Greer, who had been presented as a specialist in airline operational forecasting, and in 17 minutes of questions got him to confirm under oath that his assessment of the predictability of the 2024 fuel crisis rested on data that had not been available to Atlantic Crown at the time of the alleged breach. He knew it before the 17th question. He answered anyway because the questions were designed to give him no exit. Whitfield objected twice. Both times the panel indicated they would allow the line of questioning to continue. An hour before the close of proceedings, Naomi stood up. She walked to the center of the room. Not a performance. Simply a change of angle, the way you move in a space when you want what you're saying to reach every person in it. Opposing counsel has argued, she said, that Atlantic Crown Airways is a company in disorder, that we are a company that cannot manage its own affairs, respond to its own failures, or be trusted to operate with integrity. She paused. "I want to address that directly." The room was quiet. "This morning," she said, "I was the victim of a procedural failure at our own terminal in Chicago. A gate agent, who has since been terminated, chose not to follow a 60-second verification protocol. The result was that an airport police officer, acting on her false characterization of the situation, physically detained me. I arrived in this room this morning with a bruise on my face." Whitfield looked up. The arbitration panel looked at her face. A few people in the room who had not noticed the bruise before noticed it now. "Opposing counsel would like you to look at that and see evidence of weakness," she said. I'd like you to look at it and see something else. She held up one finger. Within 30 minutes of the incident, the gate agent's badge was pulled and her employment was terminated pending investigation. Within 1 hour, the officer involved was placed on administrative leave by the Chicago Police Department. Within 2 hours, our CEO had filed evidence preservation orders with 3 agencies. Within 3 hours, a new review of employee conduct protocols was initiated at the airline's highest level. She looked at the panel. We did not hide from what happened. We did not issue a carefully worded statement and hope it went away. We found it, named it, and moved on it. Fast, without hesitation. She walked back toward her table. Hargrove Global's case against Atlantic Crown, she said, is built the same way most bad faith acquisitions are built, on finding a genuine vulnerability and arguing that it's fatal when it isn't. Yes, we had a failure in 2024. The fuel crisis created a forecasting challenge that affected our operations. We disclosed that in our quarterly reports. We managed it, we survived it, and we are standing here today solvent and operating. She sat down. The force majeure clause exists precisely for situations that could not be fully anticipated. The opposing team's own expert has just confirmed under oath that the data required to have predicted this crisis was not available at the time of our alleged breach. Their entire case rests on a standard of foresight that their own witness says was impossible to meet. She looked at James Whitfield. Atlantic Crown does not hide its problems, she said. We find them, we fix them, and we do not let the people who profit from our difficulties mistake our accountability for weakness. She closed her folder. That's all. The panel called a recess at 4:47 p.m. 51 minutes later, they returned. The panel chair, a retired federal judge named Marion Cross, who had the patient, unhurried expression of someone who had spent 40 years watching people argue, looked at both tables and said, having reviewed the full record and the arguments presented today, this panel finds in favor of Atlantic Crown Airways. The claims brought by Hargrove Global are dismissed in their entirety. All costs are to be borne by the claimant. Naomi Reeves did not react visibly. She wrote something in her notebook. She closed it. James Whitfield across the table looked at his own hands for a moment and then began collecting his papers with the methodical efficiency of a man who has lost cleanly and knows that acknowledging it quickly is the most professional response available. Naomi's phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. I've been watching the clock. Tell me. She typed back 2 words. We won. His response took 3 seconds. Of course you did. How are you? She looked at her phone for a moment. Outside the window, Manhattan was beginning its late afternoon shift toward evening light. She typed, angry, hungry, ready to come home. Car's waiting, he wrote back. We'll talk tonight. She put the phone in her pocket. She picked up her briefcase. She walked out of the arbitration room into the hallway where Patrick was waiting with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been pacing outside a room for 6 hours and was very happy to have something to do. The car's outside, he said. I know, she said. Let's go. While Naomi had been in New York making the case of her career, the situation at O'Hare had been moving at its own speed in its own direction, with the momentum that only comes when video accountability and institutional pressure all arrive at the same time. Dave Kowalski had called 3 meetings before noon. The first was with Victoria Hale, which ended with the badge on the table and a termination letter being prepared. The second was with the Atlantic Crown Station management team, in which Kowalski walked through the verification protocol failure in specific terms and made clear that the same failure in the same circumstance would result in the same outcome for whoever was in the seat. He was not cruel about it. He was not theatrical. He was exact. The third meeting was with the internal investigation team that had arrived from Atlantic Crown's corporate office, who had spent the morning pulling camera footage, staff logs, passenger manifests, and the gate terminal records that showed in time-stamped detail exactly when Victoria Hale had stopped the verification process and exactly when she had deactivated the screen. The lead investigator, a woman named Rachel Torres, called Kowalski at 2 p.m. "We have 11 prior complaints in her file," Torres said. 4 of them are pattern-specific passengers of color, valid documentation stops or delays that were subsequently found to be without procedural basis. Each complaint received a verbal warning. No suspension, no further action. Kowalski rubbed his temples. "How long has this pattern been visible?" "First documented complaint is from 3 years and 2 months ago. And nobody escalated. Nobody escalated." "All right," Kowalski said. "Document all of it. Everything goes to legal." It did. In the police substation near Terminal 3, the internal affairs investigation into Dale Croft had begun moving with a speed that investigations don't usually achieve, the speed that comes when video evidence is not ambiguous, and 47 witnesses are available, most of whom have already submitted statements because they filmed it themselves and then found the submission form via the link that Marcus Webb had included with his now viral post. Sergeant Rivera met with her commander at 11:30 a.m. "The video is clear," she said. "He made contact without probable cause. He did not de-escalate. His partner attempted to de-escalate and was told to stand back. The subject was verbally cooperative throughout." She paused. "I don't have a defense to offer." "How many complaints in his history?" Seven Rivera said. "Over 6 years. 3 involved use of force that was contested. All cleared at the union level." Her commander looked at the phone screen, at the frame showing the open hands and the bruise. "Get it to the review board," he said. "Today." Across the city in his office on the 53rd floor, Philip Garrett was on his 4th call of the day with various officials of the city of Chicago and the Chicago Aviation Authority. He was not raising his voice. He did not need to. He had the video, the employee file, the call logs, and the quiet, immovable leverage of a company that held long-term leases on a significant portion of the airport's commercial terminal space. He made one thing clear in each call: Atlantic Crown expected specific outcomes, and it expected them in writing before the end of the business week. He got them. Marcus Webb landed at JFK at 12:45 p.m. His clip had 4.2 million views by the time the wheels touched down. He had 7 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, 2 emails from journalists, and 1 voicemail from a law professor at Northwestern, whose class he had in 4 days. He emailed Naomi's legal team the full unedited footage before he left the airport. Diane Ortega had given a voluntary statement to the Atlantic Crown investigation team at 10 a.m. She had been thorough, specific, and precise, the statement of a former industry professional who had measured what she'd seen against professional standards and found it wanting in every particular. When the investigator thanked her for her time, she said, "She never raised her voice once. I need you to know that. I was 12 feet away for the entire thing. She never raised her voice. We know the investigator said. We have it on video." "Good," Diane said. "Make sure everyone who matters sees it." Officer Espinoza submitted a full voluntary statement at 1 p.m. He stated that he had observed the interaction from the beginning, that at no point had the subject displayed physical aggression or verbal hostility that rose to the level of a disturbance that he had attempted to de-escalate, and that Officer Croft had declined. He submitted the statement knowing what it would mean for his colleague of 4 years. He submitted it anyway. By the evening news cycle, the story had been picked up by 3 national outlets, 2 aviation industry publications, and a legal affairs podcast that had run an emergency episode on the civil liability implications. Atlantic Crown's stock, which had been under pressure during the Hargrove arbitration period, closed the day up 2 points. The headline on one financial wire read, Atlantic Crown General Counsel wins arbitration day of incident. Company's legal leadership draws praise amid controversy. Garrett read the headline in his office at 6 p.m. He called Naomi. "How are you?" he asked. "Better," she said. "I'm on the Gulf Stream. I'll be in Chicago in 2 hours. I'll be at the office when you land." "Philip, go home. I'll be at the office," he said again. A pause. "Okay," she said. "But I want food. Real food. Not whatever's in the conference room." He laughed, which was not something she heard often from Philip Garrett. "Done," he said. She ended the call. She looked out the window of the company Gulfstream. A vehicle she had argued 3 years ago was an unnecessary expenditure. She had been overruled. Tonight she was not regretting it. The sun was going down over the western edge of the country. The sky was the particular orange and pink of an October evening, the kind of light that made things look briefly simpler than they were. She leaned her head back. 40,000 jobs. She let herself breathe. Marcus Webb posted a follow-up at 8 p.m. It was short. He had written it on his phone in the back of a cab on the way to his mother's apartment. It read, "For everyone asking, yes. I spoke to Dr. Reeves before she boarded. She was calm. She was completely calm the whole time. She knew exactly what was happening to her, and she named it clearly, and she didn't stop asking the right questions. I've been in law school for 3 years studying how to do what she did today, and I want to be honest, I don't know if I would have done it that well. The gate agent was fired. The officer is on leave. And she flew to New York and won her case. If you think this story is about someone powerful getting justice, watch the video again. Because for those 40 minutes at that gate, she wasn't powerful to anyone who was making decisions. She was just a black woman who wouldn't step aside. That's all. That's who they thought they were dealing with. They were wrong." The post had 800,000 likes by midnight. A legal affairs writer at a national publication called it the clearest public illustration of the gap between legal rights and lived experience that has emerged from a viral incident in recent memory. An aviation industry analyst wrote that the clip would become standard content in airline customer service training programs within a year. A law professor tweeted a link with the caption, "This is what they mean when they talk about knowing your rights." Naomi didn't see any of it that night. She was in Philip Garrett's office, eating a real dinner from the Italian place on Wacker that stayed open late. She had a glass of red wine. Her briefcase was on the floor, and she was not thinking about the brief inside it. They talked for 2 hours. About the case. About what had happened at the gate. About what needed to change, and Naomi had thoughts specific and clear about that. She drove home at 11. She parked in her building's garage. She sat in the car for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had taught 3rd grade in Baltimore for 31 years, and had told her once that the way out was through. Naomi had gone through. She got out of the car. She took the elevator upstairs. She unlocked her apartment and set her briefcase by the door, and turned on one lamp and stood in the quiet of her own space for a while. Then she went to bed. She had work to do in the morning. Victoria Hale retained an employment lawyer within the week. Her case was built on 3 claims: wrongful termination, age discrimination, and what her attorney described as a hostile work environment. It had the shape of a plausible lawsuit on paper to someone who hadn't seen the terminal logs. Atlantic Crown's legal team, operating under Naomi's oversight, did not file a countersuit against Victoria directly. What they filed was a detailed response to her claims that included the full gate terminal log time-stamped unedited, showing the exact moment Victoria had deactivated the screen. It included the 11 prior passenger complaints. It included the record of 3 verbal warnings and no escalating discipline. It included the sworn statements of 4 passengers whose prior complaints against Victoria described incidents with a similar pattern. A reason given a protocol cited an outcome that the documentation did not support. It also included one additional document that Victoria's attorney had not anticipated, an internal memo from 18 months earlier, signed by the station management team, noting that Victoria Hale had received her third verbal warning and recommending in writing that the next incident result in a formal review. The memo had been filed. No review had been initiated. Victoria's attorney called Atlantic Crown's legal department on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the suit was filed. "My client would like to explore a settlement framework," he said. "We're not interested in a settlement," the attorney on the other end said. "We're interested in a resolution. Those are different things." The resolution, signed 10 days later, required Victoria Hale to acknowledge in writing that she had failed to follow the ticket verification protocol on the day in question, that this failure had contributed to a situation in which a passenger was treated in a manner inconsistent with the airline's standards, and that this acknowledgement was legally binding. No monetary award to Victoria, no severance beyond what the law required. Her name was placed on the airline industry's internal do not hire registry, a quiet mechanism that most passengers never know exists, and that matters enormously to anyone whose career depends on working in the industry. 16 years at the gate, gone. The red nails, the perfect posture, the practiced smile, the small absolute power of deciding who moved through the door and who didn't. None of it transferable to whatever came next. What came next, by all accounts, was something much smaller and much farther from the terminal. She had mistaken a gate podium for a throne. She had been wrong about that for a long time, and nobody had told her clearly enough until the day she deactivated the wrong screen. The internal affairs investigation concluded in 38 days. The finding was unambiguous. Officer Dale Croft had used physical force against a subject who displayed no aggression had failed to follow. Department de-escalation protocol had declined a direct offer from his partner to pursue a non-force resolution, and had made physical contact without establishing probable cause. He was terminated for gross misconduct. Losing the job was the beginning of it. His pension, 22 years in 3 years from full vesting, was forfeit under the termination for cause provision. The union filed a grievance. The grievance was reviewed, then declined on the basis that the video evidence left no procedural ambiguity about what had occurred. Then Naomi filed the civil suit, Reeves versus Croft, battery, emotional distress, false imprisonment. She was not suing the department, not the city. Him, personally. She was piercing through the protection that police officers traditionally operate behind the shield of institutional cover that had absorbed Croft's previous 7 complaints without consequence. His private attorney, retained at considerable expense, reviewed the footage and the statements and the terminal logs and the 47 witness submissions, and called his client with a specific piece of advice settle. The settlement terms were Naomi's. She had written them herself. First, Dale Croft would surrender his peace officer standards and training certification permanently. No appeal. Not transferable. He could not serve as a police officer in any capacity in any state for the rest of his life. Second, Dale Croft would appear in person at a scheduled public court hearing and read a written statement written by Naomi's team, reviewed and signed by him, acknowledging that he had made physical contact with Dr. Naomi Reeves, without lawful justification that he had acted on assumption rather than evidence, and that this assumption had caused her physical injury and professional harm. He read the statement on a Thursday morning in November. The courtroom was not full. These proceedings rarely are. Naomi sat in the front row in a dark suit, her expression quiet and focused, the same expression she had worn for the 40 minutes at Gate K-22. She watched him read the words that described what he had done in the flat, careful language of legal acknowledgement. He read them in a voice that had lost all of its October authority. He was a man in a regular shirt and regular pants without the badge and the belt and the accumulated weight of an institution behind him, reading words about himself that he had no way to revise. When he finished, he looked up once. Naomi met his eyes. She did not smile. She did not nod. She simply looked at him with the steady, patient regard of someone who has made sure the record is complete. Then she stood and walked out. Naomi went to Philip Garrett 6 weeks after the incident with a document that was not a brief and not a legal memo. It was a proposal. "The company is going to be sued over this," she said. "Not by me, by the next person." The 11 complaints against Victoria, those weren't invisible. They were documented and ignored. That makes us liable for the pattern. She paused. But more than the liability, Philip, we owe it to 40,000 people who wear this logo to make sure the brand they're representing actually means what we say it means. Garrett read the proposal. "What do you want to call it?" he asked. "I don't want to name it after me," she said. "I'm naming it after you," he said. "Don't argue with me on this one." The Reeves program launched in January. It had 3 parts, and Naomi had written each one herself. The first, any Atlantic Crown employee who accumulated 3 passenger conduct complaints would receive an automatic supervisor-level review, not a note in a file. A review with documentation with outcomes. No complaint would simply be filed and forgotten. The second, the ticket verification protocol, the 60-second phone call that Victoria Hale had chosen not to make, was rebuilt. It was simplified, given a backup channel, and embedded in new staff training with a specific scenario drawn with appropriate privacy adjustments from the events of October at Gate K22. Every gate agent trained on it. Every one. The third, a passenger advocacy line. If a passenger believed they were being treated unfairly during a boarding or gate interaction, they could text a number that went directly to a duty manager. Not a recording, not a queue, a person, within 5 minutes. 6 months after launch, Atlantic Crown's customer satisfaction ratings reached the highest point in the company's recorded history. Not because the flights were faster, not because the seats were better, because people felt seen. 1 year after the incident, Naomi Reeves, now Executive Vice President and General Counsel, a title Garrett had given her over her strenuous objections that she did not need a bigger title to do her job, walked through Terminal 5 at O'Hare Rollerbag behind her, headed for Gate K22. She was flying to London to finalize a transatlantic partnership that would expand Atlantic Crown's European routes and create, by the company's own estimate, approximately 8,000 new positions over the next 5 years. She approached the podium. The gate agent was a young man named Carlos Mendez. He looked up when she came to the front. He looked at his screen. He looked back at her. "Dr. Reeves," he said. His voice carried the slight, self-aware awkwardness of someone who has been told about a person and is now standing in front of them. "Good morning." "Good morning," she said. He scanned her boarding pass. The scanner beeped. "Green light." "You're all set," he said. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "We all went through the Reeves program training last month. Your scenario, the call, the 60 seconds. He paused. "I just want you to know I will always make that call." Naomi looked at him, at the 20-something face with the earnest eyes and the badge that said Carlos, and the posture of someone who meant what he was saying. "Good," she said. "That's exactly right." She picked up her bag. She walked onto the jet bridge. She passed the spot, exactly that spot she knew it by the small mark on the wall where the textured surface had been patched after a gate modification last spring, and she placed her palm against it for a moment. Flat. Steady. Just a wall. She walked to her seat. She sat down. She opened her laptop. London waited. 40,000 jobs, 8,000 more on the way. She got to work. I've told a lot of stories on this channel, stories about people who stood their ground, stories about quiet courage and loud consequences and the long, uncomfortable distance between what's right and what actually happens. But I keep coming back to one moment in Naomi's story. Not the arbitration win, as extraordinary as that was. Not the moment Croft was stripped of his badge. not even the Reeves program, which matters more than any single outcome of that day. The moment I keep coming back to is simpler than any of that. It's the 40 minutes at the gate before anyone with authority stepped in. When it was just Naomi and Victoria, and an officer who had already made up his mind, and a crowd of people who were watching and filming but not yet acting. For 40 minutes, Naomi did something that sounds easy when you say it out loud, and is one of the hardest things in the world to actually do. She stayed calm. She spoke clearly, and she did not let anyone else's decision about who she was become her decision about who she was. She was angry. She told us that herself. She was genuinely, thoroughly angry, and she chose to make that anger useful rather than visible. She filed it somewhere it could be used, and she kept going. I think about that every time I face something unfair and feel the pull to either blow up or shut down. Those are the two responses that serve the other side. The third option, the harder one, is to stay exactly where you are. Know exactly what your rights are and make sure every single second is on the record. That's what Naomi did. And I want to say something about Marcus Webb, because I think his part of this story matters too. He was 26 years old. He didn't know who Naomi was. He didn't know what was at stake. He just watched something happen that wasn't right, and he raised his phone, and he stayed there. He didn't look away. He didn't decide it wasn't his problem. He showed up in the small, specific way that was available to him in that moment. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to have power. You just have to be someone who won't look away. That's the question I want to leave with you today. Have you ever been standing somewhere watching something unfair and had the choice to look away or stay? What did you do? What would you do now? Tell me in the comments. Every single one. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because the next story we tell might be yours. I'll see you then.